What an amazing event. Yes. A round of applause for John. Thank you, John. Yes. This is bigger than any of us. It's a wonderful adventure, but it's not over yet. We've got some wonderful opportunities to learn about millennial perspectives and an introduction for that wonderful man we've been waiting for. And so, Perry Ann, I'm going to turn it over to you. Let's join in welcoming Perry Ann.
And I'm the founder and president of the Chamber of Digital Commerce. And I'm going to just tell you a little story about how I got here and what we do and the inspiration behind the Chamber. So the story. I guess I'll just start with, does anyone know, can anybody guess what my graph is? Just yell it out if you know. Someone in this room definitely knows.
Purchasing power of the dollar.
There we go. In DC, no one knows. They're like, no, that can't be it. So my story to crypto and to Bitcoin and blockchain really started at home for me. So I'm from Florida. I grew up in Lakeland. I went to the University of Florida. Any Gators in the house? No. That's okay. That's where I went to college, obviously. This is a picture of me in the 3rd grade. This is my favorite picture of me and my little brother. But my whole life goal at that age was to go to the University of Florida. My dad went there. My grandfather went there. All my aunts and uncles went there. I was going to football games in my mother's womb. Like, that was my life goal. I remember having this realization my first day of college and thinking, now what? Like, this was my life goal. Like, I guess I can retire. So I had to kind of rethink what my purpose would be. And while in school, I was studying economics and monetary policy, and the economic collapse, the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008 happened while I was in school studying economics. So I had this unique opportunity to really figure out what was going on. But for me, it really hit home. So the Florida economy was very much built on the housing bubble. And when that burst, it impacted everyone I know. So I have an aunt who in her company was in real estate, and she's still recovering from that today. My brother, his company that he was working for at the time, just faced a ton of layoffs, and my brother lost his job. Other people in my family, their house went underwater. Our entire community, I didn't know one person that was not impacted by the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008. And being a student of economics, I was getting very frustrated with my professors at UF because none of them could explain what was happening. That's, of course, because they were teaching Keynesian theories. They didn't bother to tell me it was a theory and not science, as they tried to make us believe. But really, the only person who could answer my questions of what was happening was Dr. Paul, who was, of course, running for president at that time. He didn't win, as we know, he should have, but to me, it was somewhat ironic that this OBGYN member of Congress running for president was the only person that could answer my economics questions and not my actual economic professors. So that really spurred my passion for economic policy, and it put me on a personal study to better understand what was happening in this country. And leaving college when I graduated and entering the workforce at that time, this was kind of reminiscent of how I felt. Scared as a young person entering the workforce. And I had self-educated myself on what was going on. And some of the key reasons that I decided to move to Washington, D.C., and to dedicate my career to these issues. Today, actually, I looked this number up today, but it was still a major issue back when I was just graduating from school. The national debt is now at $20 trillion. So that's $61.9 thousand per citizen. When I graduated, that number was more like $50,000. I don't know about you. I'm not necessarily independently wealthy. I don't have just $62,000 to pay for the national debt. So not a great figure walking into. The value of the US dollar has declined 98% since the inception of the Federal Reserve. So that's what was represented on that graph in the previous slide. And then, of course, there was the $700 billion bailout. That was TARP. for Wall Street, something that was hard for me to really be okay with. There's this unprecedented level of government surveillance on its citizens, which we keep learning more about as time goes on, how deep that issue really is. So really the corrosion of civil liberties, which of course is Dr. Paul's message. We have the highest incarceration rate in the world. Being a white, middle-class, white person in America, my biggest fear in life is going to prison. I don't think I'm going to go to prison. I haven't done anything wrong. But just looking at these figures, I see Ross Ulbricht's mom is here looking at me, shaking her head. That's my biggest fear in life, is that I say the wrong thing or I screw up and my life is over. And then 3 in 5 Americans are on prescription drugs. We have a major issue with the pharmaceutical industry. So I really entered the workforce as basically terrified. But it was really Paul's message. And the only reason why I heard his message was because he was running for president. And he knew, I think he felt like he had a good chance of winning, but at the same time, he also knew he was up against this huge, powerful force and that it was really not stacked in his favor, which really goes to show you the importance of following your dreams and following your own message and sticking to your ideology. So this conference is filled with entrepreneurs, investors, technologists. When you believe in something and you put yourself out there and you put your ideas out, whether you become successful, most startups are not successful and that's okay, but you're getting your ideas out there. And you can inspire people, and you never know who's listening and you never know who you're impacting just by sharing your passions with the public. So I moved to Washington, D.C., which is my least favorite place on earth. I have never felt like I've fit in Washington. I've always felt like an outsider, but I moved there to work on issues that I cared about, to fight for a better economic future for my generation and for those that will come after me. So here's a picture of me right when I got to D.C. I used to go to the Fed because I used to read all about it, and notice I'm standing outside. They didn't let me in the door. And I'm also all bundled up, Floridian in D.C. This picture was taken in February, freezing. But I used to go and walk around, and really the reason I went there was because I had knowledge of what was actually going on, and I wanted to make a difference. So I went to Capitol Hill. So I worked for a member of Congress, one of Dr. Paul's colleagues, and my most memorable day of working on Capitol Hill was the day that Audit the Fed passed the House. So that's Dr. Paul, the day his bill actually passed. He happened to be giving a speech that same afternoon for Capitol Hill staff. So he had this program where he would come and he would give special talks for the staff to help inspire them and to share his ideas with other congressional staffers. I had perfect attendance at all of his talks, but I knew his bill was up to be voted on that day. So I printed on the congressional paper a copy of the bill, and I believe I have the first signed copy of the bill, and that's that picture there. So, and it's hidden away, so I don't have copies for you, unfortunately. I should put it on the blockchain, but I think I'm going to save, and I have this in my office too. But it was on Capitol Hill that I first learned about Bitcoin. So I worked on the Jobs Act, which was a bill that brought us crowdfunding, and during that process, we were briefed on Bitcoin, so this digital currency. It didn't end up making it in the bill. It was a little early for that. But it was a technology that we were briefed on. And as someone who had followed Dr. Paul very closely and was basically like a Ron Paul groupie working on the Hill, the moment I learned about this currency that's not controlled by the government or any corporation or organization, that was just a fascinating topic to me. And so I immediately started my own personal study into the crypto space. And over time, that's what led me to build the chamber. So a little story behind what we do and why we decided to put this organization together. As someone following Bitcoin in the early days, 2013 was an important year for the industry. So that was really the year that this technology hit the mainstream media. So if you guys remember, Cyprus went through their bailout that year, and many of the Cypriots started buying Bitcoin because they weren't sure what was going to happen with their currency. And that was really the moment that Bitcoin hit international news headlines, and the price went up over 3,000% during that time. So a lot of exciting opportunities for the early adopters in the space. It seemed like awesome times, but then there were also some not so great things that happened, and some pretty negative headlines that also had an impact on the industry. So Mt. Gox was at the time the most popular exchange, and it collapsed, and a ton of customer money was gone. And of course, that was the only thing the media wanted to write about and pay attention to. And direct response of the Mt. Gox collapse was the New York Department of Financial Services bit license regulation. So does anybody remember this guy, Superintendent Ben Lawsky? He's showing you how much he actually cares about Bitcoin and the blockchain. After Mt. Gox, he went around the country giving all these talks saying, we're going to save the industry from itself, and BitLicense was a direct effect from the Mt. Gox collapse. And then, of course, Silk Road, where people were buying and selling drugs using Bitcoin, that led to Senator Joe Manchin calling for a ban on Bitcoin. So there you can see when the media gets a hold of certain instances, or they just want to focus on the one thing that's not positive, how that can impact public policy. And as someone who had lived and worked in Washington in public policy my entire career, my concern was that people like Joe Manchin and Ben Lawsky and others truly didn't understand the technology. They didn't understand the benefit. The only thing they cared about what was wrong. They didn't care about what was right. And so that's why we formed the Chamber. The Chamber serves as the industry's resource. We're on the ground in Washington, D.C., and we're here to make the case for this technology and to shut down people like Joe Manchin who want to ban Bitcoin, and to ensure that entrepreneurs and investors and startups in this space actually have the opportunity to go to market. We founded the Chamber in July of 2014, so we've been at it for 3 years. We've learned a lot, and we've seen a lot over the past 3 years. So when we founded and first opened our doors, we started with about 15 member companies. And in 3 years, we've grown to the largest nonprofit in this space. We now represent over 130 companies around the world who are innovating and investing in blockchain-based technologies. This is just a sample of some of the companies that we represent, and I just kind of wanted to show you the range of companies that want to be a part of the ecosystem. So we represent a number of the top or the largest banks in the world, from Wells Fargo, BNY Mellon, BNP, Paribas, which is the 5th largest bank in the world. They're based in France, including some of the largest exchanges, the CME Group, which is the largest derivatives exchange in the world, NASDAQ. We have TMX, which is the largest exchange out of Canada. Major technology providers like Microsoft, IBM, Cisco are members, but the majority of the membership are startups. So these are private companies, the most creative minds, the true innovators, who really makes up the body of the companies that we represent. So what's been accomplished? Top 3 milestones over the past 3 years, and I just pulled out a few just to share with you how we've been spending our time, and how having formal representation in Washington has really made a difference. So we had the opportunity to testify in a congressional hearing last year. The hearing was in June of 2016, and then in September 2016, House Resolution 835 was passed. So I'll move out of the way so we can read it, but I'm just going to read what this says. This was passed and now is part of congressional record forever. And it was really a powerful statement. It says, "Now therefore be it resolved that it is the sense of the House of Representatives that, whereas blockchain technology with the appropriate protections has the potential to fundamentally change the manner in which trust and security are established in online transactions through various potential applications in sectors including financial services, payments, healthcare, energy, property management, and intellectual property management. So it was a really big deal to go from having a member of Congress say, let's ban Bitcoin, to in less than 2 years having the House vote on this and put this language into the congressional record. So this was really the first time that a U.S. government body said something nice about our industry. The second of the top three milestones would be we hosted the first ever government-sponsored blockchain hackathon. We did this earlier this year in March of this year. We co-hosted a hackathon with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So they got a grant, so they used federal dollars to pay for this competition. To put it on, they gave out several $1,000s. It was over $10,000 in awards to the teams. And they came in and we brought teams in from all around the United States and used blockchain technology to code potential applications in the healthcare sector. This actually spun off of a previous engagement we did with HHS. Last year, they put out what was called a call for papers, and they just put to the public, we want to know more about how blockchain can be applied in healthcare, send us white papers. And they were expecting to get 5 to 10 submissions maybe. And it was one of the most successful call for papers the Department of Health and Human Services had ever had. They had 77 submissions from all around the world. So they got really excited and said, I think we're on to something. We want to take this a step further. Let's dig into this a little bit more. So we proposed doing a hackathon as a great way for the government to start getting their hands on the technology. And we did that earlier this year. We did it at Georgetown University. We used their facilities. And these were the judges from the competition. And number 3 would be having the opportunity to go inside the Federal Reserve and talk blockchain at the Fed. So notice kind of the shift from actually moving outside to inside. And I'll just kind of talk a little bit about the Fed's transition in this space. So the first time the Federal Reserve ever said anything about the industry was, actually it was 2006. Sorry, that date is wrong. So February 2006, Dr. Janet Yellen, her first public comments were in a congressional hearing. So twice a year, the head of the Fed, or the chairman of the Fed, comes to Congress and gives an address. And Senator Joe Manchin, who was trying to ban Bitcoin, asked her, said, will you ban Bitcoin? And her statement was, we do not have any jurisdiction to regulate Bitcoin in any way. And she basically said, I don't want to answer your question, move on. But that was the only statement we had from the Fed. So it was the only anything we had, which was kind of hard to read in between the lines of what they thought, good or bad, about the technology. We didn't really know if they were going to try to come in and get rid of this or use their power to stifle the technology in any way, shape, or form. A few months later, we were actually invited at the request of Janet Yellen to come in and brief her on blockchain. And we got to take a couple companies with us. And it was a joint meeting. So once a year, the Fed, the IMF, and the World Bank get together and hold a joint meeting. And they bring in central banks from all over the world. So there's about 90 central banks. It was the heads of the central banks there. And we curated a series of briefings for the central banks around the world and talked about this technology. And so Adam Ludwin, who's the CEO of Chain, gave the keynote at that event. And a few months later, Janet Yellen talked about blockchain technology and gave us a little bit more insight into where the Fed, where their thinking is behind this technology. So in January 2017, so almost a year later, she said, we're looking at its promise. And the last statement here, blockchain is an important technology. So we went from don't ask me anything to this is important. And that day that we were meeting with her, she actually stood up in front of all of those 90 banks and she gave a short remark on blockchain. And she told her peers, she said, you should be doing everything you can to learn about this technology because it's an important technology. And she talked a lot about fintech in general. And she said that We've seen fintech over the years, how it can enhance the economy. And the example she used was derivatives, and how derivatives and those financial products have changed the way of life for farmers and really increased their standard of living. So that was her analogy, and she's now actually said blockchain is an important technology twice in a public setting. So at least they're saying good things about us. And then some other key milestones and champions for us to all be aware of. This industry actually has quite a few, what I call champions within government. So these are people who have publicly put their name on this technology and said, I'm going to support it, this is important, and I'm going to do what I can to foster innovation. So the first one would be the CFTC chairman, Chris Giancarlo, and that's him on that far picture. He actually came to our ribbon cutting for our office. We opened up the DC Blockchain Center about a year ago, and he came and was there and was there for our grand opening. And he has proposed what's called his do no harm approach. So you can think of this as like the Hippocratic oath that the medical community takes. And he says, as regulators, we should also take this do no harm approach to blockchain. And whatever we do from a regulatory perspective and a public policy perspective should allow the innovation to thrive. So that's Giancarlo with myself, and that's Jeff Garzik, one of the core devs in the back. The second one is Mick Mulvaney. So he is now the head of the White House Office of Management and Budget. If you're not familiar with OMB, this is the office that oversees the purse strings of the federal government. So they procure the budget. So every single federal agency has to submit their budget to his office. Mick puts it together, and then he gives it to the president, and the president gives it to Congress to pass it and appropriate the funds. So he is, this position, the director of OMB, is probably the most influential role over the agencies and the regulators. And he was the founder of the Congressional Blockchain Caucus. And it's kind of funny, looking back over the past couple years, I always make a joke. In 2014, when we first opened our doors, and the only thing anybody knew about Bitcoin and blockchain was that people were buying drugs with it, he was the one person that would take our meetings. And so we have, over the years, formed a great relationship with him. And now that he's serving in the administration as opposed to Congress, he's in a very influential role over the regulators in terms of ensuring that our industry has the opportunity to grow. And then the third would be the Congressional Blockchain Caucus. And this picture here is Representative Jared Polis of Colorado. He's a Democrat. He's now running for governor. And then Representative David Swikert, a Republican from Arizona. So it's a bipartisan caucus. A caucus is basically a club in Congress. They come together over a particular mission, and theirs is to promote and educate the Congress on blockchain technology. So in terms of having a group there on the ground in DC, we formed a lot of relationships. We've done a lot of education throughout the government, and we formed some really key champions who work with our members to ensure that this industry has the opportunity to survive. So I guess to kind of sum up my talk, my thoughts on blockchain and why this is important. As a millennial who lived through the financial crisis and entered the workforce at probably the lowest labor participation rate in our country's history, at least recent history, I really learned that the current financial system is stacked against most people. It benefits very, very few. And for those that it does benefit, they have no interest in creating a better system. And that's much behind the technology evolved here behind Bitcoin, in that it gives people, consumers, individuals, the opportunity to opt into a new financial system. No longer do we have to just participate in this one system that the government created. We now can participate in something that's not controlled by the government or any corporation, and that everyone has access to this and has the opportunity to build and innovate in this system. So with that, are we ready for Dr. Paul?
Come on.
You guys are ready. Okay. Is Dr. Paul ready? Do I get the heads up? Okay. So Dr. Paul was very much probably the biggest inspiration in my life. He was the entire reason I moved to DC. And I didn't move to DC to work in Bitcoin. I moved there before kind of this all started. And I ended up learning about Bitcoin through my journey in Washington. And again, I'll just say it, Dr. Paul really stuck to his principles and what he believed in. And he did something very powerful by running for president, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And just by participating in that process, he got his ideas in front of people all over the world. And I've probably watched every single YouTube interview of Dr. Paul that's out there. So one of the things that he has said is when he first started, and he served in Congress for over 22 years, and he went there with this message of we need to audit the Fed, and he was like the only person in the entire world that had any idea what that meant. But because he did something bold and ran for president, so many other people had the opportunity to be educated on what was actually happening and how that impacts people, and it inspired a lot of people, including myself. So I was given actual prepared remarks on how to introduce Dr. Paul, but honestly, I've been following him for so long that I brought my own, so I'm going to do a little bit of both. So Dr. Paul, some history on him. He served in the U.S. Air Force as a flight surgeon and in the National Guard. He had his own practice as an OBGYN. He delivered over 4,000 babies, including one of my cousins. I don't know if he remembers him or not, but my cousin does. It's like his one thing that he is proud of. He's like, I was delivered by Dr. Paul. I have a lot of cousins that are hippies. He served in the U.S. House of Representatives for over 22 years, so he served across multiple terms, they added up to about 22 years. He became the first member of Congress in the history of the United States to serve concurrently with either a son or daughter. So Senator Rand Paul and Congressman Ron Paul served together at the same time, making history. And then he also ran for president 3 times. So he retired from Congress after his most recent run for president. And since then, he has put together a syndicated podcast called the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Hopefully you guys are paying attention to that. He's written many, many, many books over his years, including his most recent one is The School Revolution. So while I was first introduced to Ron Paul through his thoughts on monetary policy, he's also a prolific writer on our approach to national defense and has been a really big defender of not meddling in foreign issues, and he's written on that. But his most recent is on schooling and how, I guess kind of the story of when I was in college, I feel like I learned nothing. Most of what I learned I had to teach myself because they want to only teach you a certain way of life and not give you the opportunity to really truly understand what's going on in the world. So while in Congress, Dr. Paul gave himself, I guess he earned the nickname of being Dr. No. Which is not a bad thing, but he always stuck to his principles and only voted on measures where the Constitution was very clear that it was appropriate to vote in that particular way. So this is probably my biggest honor of being able to introduce my hero. I think I'm going to retire after today. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce you to an American hero, Dr. Ron Paul.
Hello there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.